Good morning. Welcome to this morning's webinar. This webinar is being hosted by the Central Ohio APWA branch and also the Ohio LTAP Center. And the topic is online bid opening, and we're hoping to have a very robust question and answer session with all of the attendees. So in order to do that, I would like to make certain that everybody knows where the question box is located in the GoToWebinar panel. If you haven't been on a GoToWebinar session before, if you could please look for that box and drop me a hi or hello. That way I know that you've been able to find it. This is Victoria Beal with the Ohio LTAP Center, and I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to our host today, Josh Ford.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today on our co-branded Central Ohio APWA and LTAP webinar turned Q&A, where we are going to discuss online bid openings. I forgot to mention in our flyer that you all will be receiving a PDH for attending this webinar. I am Josh Ford and am the president of the APWA Central Ohio chapter, and will be helping to facilitate the discussion and ask the questions as they come in. As we go forward, our presenters are going to talk about how they have handled the online platform, along with lessons learned. Joining us today, we have Lauren Curto, who is the Litigation Support Manager at Bricker and Eckler, LLP, providing support to all legal departments in the areas of e-discovery training, project management, data management, and legal technology implementation. Lauren was previously a project attorney, and her experience includes high-stakes e-discovery matters and overall litigation strategy. She is also a Relativity certified user involved in training and implementing user-based applications and platforms for all new attorneys and practice groups, and advancing the firm's knowledge of such tools. Furthermore, as a certified information privacy manager and a OneTrust certified professional, Lauren assists clients by providing guidance and strategic administration of in-house privacy management software for risk and compliance assessments, as well as privacy governance, analysis, and consulting. We also have with us today the City of Worthington Director of Service and Engineering, Dan Whited, the City of Worthington Assistant Director of Service and Engineering, Rob Chandler, and the City of Grove City Public Service Director, Cindi Fitzpatrick. Dan, Rob, and Cindi already conduct their bid process online and can definitely speak to any growing pains that other communities may experience as they look to move their services online. With this being a more Q&A type event, we will not be doing a formal presentation, and rather will be more of a general discussion. So I encourage all of you with questions to submit those in the chat. Those will go right to me, and I will put those out to the group for answer. Now, without further ado, I will turn things over to Lauren.
Thanks for the introduction, Josh, and thank you to everyone who is attending today. My portion, I'm just going to briefly cover the Open Meetings Act and what that means for holding virtual meetings now and possibly into the future. And then I'm going to just touch on how we've kind of been handling virtual bid openings at Bricker and Eckler and some technology considerations to take into account as you might be planning your own virtual bid openings. So I have a couple of slides that I'm also going to share, so I will do that now. Okay, and anybody let me know if for some reason you can't see these slides. Okay, so this first slide, like I said, I'm just going to briefly touch on House Bill 404. So November 19th, 2020, the Ohio General Assembly passed this substitute House Bill 404, which basically extended the ability to hold virtual public meetings in response to the COVID-19 pandemic beyond the previous December 1st, 2020 deadline. So this House Bill 404 extended that through July 1st of this year. And this House bill basically says members of a public body may hold and attend meetings and hearings by teleconference, video conference, or similar electronic technology. Any resolution or action taken during these meetings has the same effect as if it were taken during an in-person regular meeting. Members attending these virtual meetings shall be considered present and counted as part of a quorum if that is necessary, and they're also permitted to vote if that is necessary as well. There are a few obligations that public bodies need to be aware of as you're kind of doing these virtual public meetings, and the first one being notice. So in order to hold a virtual public meeting, you need to first provide notice that the meeting will be held pursuant to these special procedures. The notice must be specifically provided to the media that have requested notification of meetings, and any party required to be notified of a hearing at least 24 hours before the meeting and or hearing. In addition, the notice must be provided using reasonable methods. So any person may determine the time, location, and manner by which the meeting or hearing will be conducted. And if the meeting is convened on an emergency basis, the public body shall immediately notify media and the parties required to be notified of the meeting and hearing. Another obligation that was kind of baked into the virtual meetings is it must be accessible to the public. So a public body holding a virtual meeting must ensure that the meeting is accessible. Examples that allow accessibility include live streaming, broadcasting on local radio, television, public access channels, or using a teleconference or other similar technology where people can log in and hear and see if that is necessary as well. The public body must also ensure that the public can observe and hear any of the discussions of all the members of the public body, whether the member is participating in person or electronically. So basically, it needs to be open to the public. They need to understand how to log in, how to dial in, and they need to be able to hear and see every public body member. So those are the two obligations that you really need to make sure that you're adhering to. Some other considerations is if you're going to have a meeting that includes public participation, you kind of want to think about that ahead of time. So does your technology platform allow for interacting? I know some technology platforms, if you do it as a webinar, it's really hard to get public participation or to allow chat. So you want to keep that in the back of your mind as well. And then also, if you are going to have a meeting that requires any type of executive session or private breakout rooms, you want to make sure that those settings are set and test all of that beforehand so you're good to go on the day of the meeting. So more into the technology considerations. So once you've decided to do your virtual public bid opening, some things to just consider. What platform do you want to use? So one thing you'll need to know is how many people are going to attend. So some platforms will have, like 100-person limit. And then other platforms will have like a business option that you can do. You have to pay a little bit more for those, but those will generally take you up to 1,000 attendees. So it really just depends on how many people you think are going to show up. So you need to make sure that that attendee limit is going to account for how many people you might have. If for some reason you have a 100-person limit and you think 500 people are going to show up to this meeting, then you'll want to make sure you upgrade to the business account, or you can host your public meeting on Zoom or whatever it is, but then also live stream it at the same time. So anybody who can't get into the Zoom platform can then log on to like a Facebook Live and watch it live. So you want to keep that in mind. Waiting rooms, breakout rooms. So waiting rooms are a good idea, again, if you think you're going to have a bid opening where a lot of members of the public might show up. You'll want to have a waiting room set up so you can identify people of the media, you can identify people that need to be let in before the start of the bid opening. And then you'll also want to review your host and attendee controls. So again, if you have a bid opening where a lot of members of the public might show up, you're going to want to monitor who can turn on their video, who can turn on their audio, just to kind of reduce the amount of distractions and interruptions that you might have there. And then another thing to consider always is if you want to record the meeting, and then if you want to make those recordings publicly available on a website or posting it later on for people to go and view later. As for the bid submittals, the way that we do it at Bricker and Eckler is for the submittal portion, we use a secure FTP site. And Bricker monitors that on our end just to make sure the submissions are coming in. We use timestamps, we require email address and company names, and that way at the end of the submittal process, we can export out a report that will say the name of the submitter, the company of the submitter, and the exact time that they submitted their bid. And that's really nice to have when you're doing this in electronic form. So you can do follow-ups. We always like to provide at least 30 minutes before bid. We like to send out confirmations to people saying, we have received your bid, it's been loaded, so they don't need to have any type of tech stress there. But it's always good to have that timestamp report as well, just in case someone comes back and tries to say, hey, well, you didn't read our bid, you have that timestamp saying it was 5 minutes past or whatever. Follow-up emails, I kind of touched on that. So for the actual bid opening, we like to use just standard technology platform, Zoom, WebEx, and basically I will email out the bids to our client. As the client receives those bids, after the amount of time, they will read those live. Sometimes our clients like to record, sometimes they don't, but basically they're just reading aloud the bids. We do offer it's always client dependent, but we do offer questions to come through the chat, and then we have a moderator who reads through the chat. We allow kind of that interaction sometimes there as well. One thing that we always do before the start of the bid, of course, is test audio, test video, just to make sure that we've covered all of our bases there. And then another good idea, if your host maybe is in a location where they're not sure about their internet connection, it's always good to have a backup host. So sometimes you can have multiple hosts, or you can have a co-host. You always want to make sure you have that backup host just in case your main person loses internet connection for whatever reason. You can continue on with your meeting and have just like that backup. So that's basically all I had to share on just kind of the House Bill 404 and some technology considerations for you to consider, and kind of how we do things in-house here at Bricker. I will pass the mic.
Great. Thank you, Lauren. Now we are going to move into our Q&A, and I know that we're going to touch on the online bid opening process, but also how we're receiving bids, the advertising process, and kind of the whole online internet way of going through and hosting this versus the traditional way. So first question here, and I've got several questions preloaded, but again, as any of you folks in the audience get some questions, please submit those in the chat. First question here is, what was your old way of doing bid openings, and what issues did you have with the old way? I'll open this one up to Dan and Rob. You're muted, Dan.
We would do the traditional bid opening in the past, but that was actually before, or just as I became the city engineer in Worthington. So I'll open that one up to Rob to let him answer that question.
We did the traditional bid opening. Usually at that time it was held at noon on Fridays when we did our bid openings. And it was all paper submission, and either the service director or myself acting as the service director's designee, along with the finance director, taking minutes and writing down the bid tab, would be there. We'd make a formal announcement, do the gavel, all that stuff, and open up, read aloud, place them out on a table, and anybody could take a look, which we'd usually get contractors kind of swarming them, asking for copies, all those different things. And we did not necessarily take any questions at that point in time. And after it was over, then we would go ahead and scan and email out a complete bid tab. And that was kind of it. Where it got cumbersome was in the formatting for each different bid, and having to pay or ask contractors to pay for what usually wound up being about $2,500 in printing fees for plan sets and bid books, that with your different plans and specs all included, sometimes you'd be reaching a 400 or 500 page document. And it's been pretty wonderful not to have to pay for 25 bid books that wind up in the recycling bin later on. So that was our process prior.
Was yours similar, Cindi?
Yeah, we pretty much did it the exact same way. We only offered hard copy paper documents, and people had to pick them up from our city hall. So that required them a trip into our building, and then they would pay for the documents in order to even be able to review it to know if they wanted to bid. And so then we would host a meeting just like Rob described at our council chambers. You know, the people were usually dropping off their bids right at the last minute, so they just stick around for the opening. We'd all go in council chambers and read them off, and then they would look at them just to compare some of their unit pricing of maybe where they lost it. But yeah, we held it very similar to what Rob did.
Was your advertising process kind of similar, where you would go through and put something in a paper publication?
Yeah, we always put it in the paper and then on our website. That was the two ways that we advertised.
How long ago did you move your operation online?
You want me to go first?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we actually just went online in 2020, and we were really pushed that way due to COVID. It had always kind of been on our radar because we knew there were some potential cost savings and time savings efficiencies that we could gain by going to it, but we never really just bit the bullet. And then when COVID came, we knew we had some pretty big projects coming up that we wanted to still get out there. We were all pivoting and figuring out alternate means and methods. And so we jumped in and started doing research on the different platforms, and so that we could get some of our projects out in the new COVID era, where we didn't want to be, our buildings were closed to the public and actually still are. And so we didn't want people coming in for documents and you know, kind of passing things back and forth. And then obviously hosting a bid opening in person wasn't feasible. So that really pushed us this way. And we now host our bid openings via WebEx events, which, much like Lauren said, on that platform, you're allowed up to 1,000 attendees. We don't ever get 1,000 attendees at our bid openings, but the capability is there. And we post on our website, and then also through the platform that we use, where, you know, contractors are able to subscribe to that. So I actually feel like the notification is better for them because they get made aware they subscribe to both types of projects, and then also they can subscribe to owners, so they can see anything that we put out. And so I think the notification visibility is actually better in this format.
I guess that moves us into, you did quite a bit of research on the various platforms and stuff out there. What did you end up settling on, and why? Kind of also going over the other ones that you did your research on.
Are you guys able to see my screen? Victoria told me to do audience view. Okay, now I can see what you're seeing. Yep. So yeah, the whole timing of this, fortunately for me, lined up when I needed to do a capstone for my master's, and so I chose to do it on this, which forced me into some really good research on this topic. And as I went through, I ended up analyzing these 4 platforms, so Bid Express, Central Bidding, Procure Now, and Bonfire. And then there to the left, you can see like the major categories that I was comparing them against. The first is the payment model, whether we were looking to do a vendor pay or an owner pay. And so, you know, for us, we were really looking for a platform that was vendor pay, but we also wanted to make sure that it was reasonable for our vendors. And so we found that we ended up choosing Bid Express overall, but in their payment model, all vendors can look at our documents for free, so they can review them in full and see whether they want to bid our project or not. They only pay if they actually submit a bid, and it's only $35 a submission or $50 a month unlimited. I did reach out to a lot of the local contractors that typically bid our projects, and all of them were already members of Bid Express. So really it was a cost savings for them because before they were paying for our documents, $75 to $150, just depending on how big the package was. And then B, they were already members, so this was no additional cost for them. And they were very receptive and wanted Grove City to move to this, much like many of the other communities in the area. We also wanted to make sure that the platform was reliable. And so you can see across there, almost all of the platforms that I looked at were, you know, exactly comparable. They promoted 99.99% reliability, and that they were backed by, well-known Amazon Web Services or Google or the like. Data storage was important just to make sure that, no matter how many documents or additional bids that we did, that they could be on there and how long it could be stored on there, and all of them were unlimited. So we moved into doing some demos and understanding customer support from each of them. And so this is really where the platforms for me separated themselves on the user experience. We wanted it to be easy for our vendors, easy for us to upload, and that's where BidExpress really kind of set itself apart for us and our needs. And then the customer support was really good for each of them. BidExpress says that they only give you 6 hours of training, and that's really, they probably put that because that's about all you need. It's so user friendly, but they have always been very supportive on anything that we're setting up, and have never, tried to charge for any additional training. So that's how we laid it on BidExpress.
Great, thank you, Cindi. Dan and Rob, I'll bounce the same question over to you. How long have you been conducting your operations online, and what platform did you pick and why?
We moved over about 4.5 years or so ago, and we picked BidExpress for all the same reasons that Cindi has referenced. We were primarily looking to improve the quality of our bids and our bidders, replace the manual entry of the bid tabs, accelerate that time to notice to proceed, simplifying that process, making it more efficient and effective, utilizing the technologies that we had available that weren't being utilized at the time, to manage that process more effectively. And also, as Rob alluded to, as a sustainable community, to make sure we weren't putting out all of these paper products that were going to do nothing but be recycled. And Rob, I'll let you add anything to that you feel appropriate.
Yeah, sure. We had, as Dan said, started the process. It was 2016, and it took about 6 to 8 months of meetings and working with our city attorney to make sure that we had things in place that we could do this legally. So that took, and we can get into this discussion later, that took changing a few ordinances, and actually took a change of our charter, since we are a home rule community. But once we got that going, then the transition was pretty smooth once we got things loaded in. And something that has been, for me, really a huge positive with the move is that there are a lot of fail safes built in, especially when you're doing some unit pricing and extension, as well as some of the affidavits that need to be filled out. Oftentimes we would get paper bid submissions that had a lot of mistakes in them, and it took a lot of staff time to go through, suss out those mistakes, and then decide, do we throw out a bid, and then have the discussion. Luckily, we never had an injunction thrown over something like that, but we did have bids in the past that had to be thrown out over what was a simple mistake. But from a legal standpoint, it was a mistake nonetheless, and rendered the bid unresponsive or incomplete. And having the fail safes in BidExpress has helped to save that work and that worry.
You touched on this just now. Why don't would you please discuss any of the legislation that needed to be adopted in your move online?
Yeah, sure. The first one was a change in the city charter that allowed for public notification to take place electronically, and not simply via, I think the wording was a paper publication in regular circulation and affordable. So that meant we paid for it to go out to the Columbus Dispatch, as well as put it into the local This Week newspaper, so that everybody could get a hold of it. And of course, that expense started to get astronomical as economic viability of the print press started to go kind of the way of the dinosaurs. So we got that changed, as well as some of the ordinances that had that sort of language. along with updating some ordinances. And not being an attorney, I can't speak to exactly which ones, but wording them in such a way that they would stay commensurate with whatever the Ohio Revised Code and how administrative code allowed for with these things. So, just the regular process of going through council meetings and 2 readings and public hearing and all that type of stuff meant we couldn't move quite as quickly as we'd like to, but it meant that we covered all of our bases and made sure that we turned the coin over on all 3 sides and looked at everything before we put this into play to make sure that we were legal and that we weren't excluding a whole class or a demographic of contractor by doing this.
Thank you, Rob. I've got a question here that came in for Lauren, and it's kind of along the line of any legal issues that have come up. Are you aware of any litigation or basis behind the complaints? But the question that came through is, Rob, earlier you mentioned allowing bidders being able to examine the bids after the bid opening. Lauren, could you weigh in on ORC 9.28, the competitive solicitation as a public record?
So I don't really have, you said ORC what?
9.28.
So I don't really have like an analysis of 9.28. But so can you restate the question? I'm sorry, Josh.
Yeah, it was.
Are you just asking if the bids are going to be considered as a public record in this type of arena?
Yeah, the question is, it came in being bidders being able to examine bids after the bid opening.
Yeah.
Can
So,
Lauren weigh in?
yeah. So, technically they will eventually be a public record. Generally, in all of the bid openings that we have, the bid is pretty much read aloud for everyone to hear, and then if it's recorded, they'll post that recording as well. To be completely honest, all of our clients, I mean, they don't necessarily offer up the bids to everybody to go and view them. If you do want to place a public records request for those public bids, I mean, yeah, they technically are considered a public record. So if you go through that formal process of requesting it via a public records request, usually 9 times out of 10 will be required to then provide that to you to review. So yeah, I would say that under that ORC law, it is technically considered public record, and you would have the opportunity to view the entire bid in its submitted form.
Are you aware of any other litigation that's popped up as a result of online bid openings and kind of what the basis was behind the complaints?
So none of our clients have really experienced any type of litigation that's come from a virtual bid opening or any type of virtual meeting or any resolution that's been passed in any of these virtual meetings. I know that there have been some one-off litigations, and I'd be happy to provide follow-up on that. I know we have a write-up of those somewhere. Off the top of my head, I don't have the examples, but maybe if we come back to this a little later in the meeting, I can touch on a couple of those.
Okay. And then this may be a good question. I don't know who best to answer this, but with electronic bid submissions, you don't receive original bonds. How is that addressed?
You don't receive original what? Sorry.
Original bonds.
I can jump in here if you guys want. So through Bid Express, there is a feature where they partner with an electronic bid bond company, and many of the contractors are already members of that association as well. So they're able to submit electronically their bid bonds. If they don't want to do that, then what we do is have, once we do they scan in their bid with the electronic bid submission, and then whoever ends up being that we award to, we have them mail us the original after the fact, but they submit it in the platform as an attachment, the scanned copy of it, and then we get the original once we're ready to award.
Thank you, Cindy. I know this may be a good question here for Dan and Rob. How have you handled requests from contractors who are not tech savvy?
We have, up until recently, until COVID hit, we still allowed for paper submission. And so we did kind of a hybrid bid opening, to where we had one of my counterparts was on a laptop in the office and was on speakerphone, and I would conduct any physical paper opening. He would conduct any digital opening or virtual opening, however you want to put it, and all would be read aloud. We haven't had anybody present for an actual paper submission bid opening in just over 2 years now. So when COVID hit and we started looking at our first CIP project to go out to bid, our charter allowed for the city manager to, kind of declare the rules, so to speak. And we had been publishing since we started actively soliciting bids via Bid Express that this was a process and we would transition completely away from the paper bid process. So that's how we've handled that. We've given plenty enough time, and we've had a couple that have called and asked if they could submit via paper, and we just go ahead and direct them right to the Bid Express website. And we're getting to a day and age that there's some question in my mind, and I don't mean to sound prejudicial, but there's some question if Bid Express is so user friendly, and if you can fill out a bid form via paper, as long as you pay your money to get on Bid Express, you can fill it out. And with the submittal process, after a contract is in place, with a lot of digital signatures going back and forth nowadays, and a lot of those things, there comes into some question if a contractor has some tech issues, then we have to have the talk about whether they're the right ones to be submitting a bid for a job. While we were still taking paper, I will say that most of the time, the paper bid submissions came in usually 10 to 20% higher than the digital submissions on average.
Josh, if you don't mind, I'll piggyback a little bit and just kind of echo some of what Rob said there. We haven't had that issue where anyone asked if they could still submit paper. Everybody's sort of on board, it seems so far. But kind of the path he was heading down, I can tell you that the software platform that we use for project management of our CIPs is way more cumbersome and difficult to manage, with submittals and RFIs and change orders and pay applications and all of those things that come along with managing a CIP, that if they're not able to submit their bid on Bid Express, they're going to have a real hard time managing their way through actually performing the capital improvement project and managing the project. So.
I'll put this out to you first, Cindy. Have you seen a decrease in non-responsive bids since switching to electronic bidding?
Yeah, absolutely. And just in the, Rob touched on this earlier, not only the math errors, just simple line item extensions, because the software automatically calculates that for you. So as long as you put in the actual unit cost and not a lump sum cost into a unit price field, it's going to be accurate, as well as making sure that they have all the forms submitted. Bid Express has several fail safes, and before a person finally submits their bid, I think along the way they're reminded 3 times of mandatory documents that have to be submitted. They get a screen, a window that pops up that says you need to attach this, it's mandatory. And so they're warned several times of what needs to be in, and then one final time right before they click that submit button. So we haven't had the scenario where somebody's missing, some minor form that was required, where you would see that sometimes in paper bid submissions. So I think that error reduction is a huge benefit of moving to an electronic bidding platform.
Cindy, in some of our prior discussions, you also indicated that pushing those bid summaries back out to the contractors was much quicker than in the past.
Yeah, so there's, you know, since they automatically calculate, the software generates a bid tabulation right after the opening. Oftentimes we'll just go ahead and click post a parent, and it'll post the bid tabulation out there for folks. We still do go back and review, you know, kind of line item by line item, the bids after the fact before we make a recommendation for award, but we're able to produce those much quicker, and it's not manual entry anymore. You know, you can export the Excel file that each bidder submitted and put together a comprehensive bid tabulation, you know, just by copying and pasting. Whereas prior, when they were submitted on paper, handwritten unit price forms that can get really long on some of these big projects, you know, we were paying our engineering consultant to go back and manually enter all of that. And so we've seen some cost savings definitely in both bid preparation and bid evaluation after the fact. So
Dan and Rob, has that been your experience too? I know that you had already indicated in previous discussion here, but you've had also a decrease in the non-responsive bids received since going online?
Absolutely. We've had a few glitches, and it's been in the way that some of the forms were set up early on. You'll want to go through and really take your time and make sure those things are set up correctly. For instance, if there is a form or an input that you're asking for that is an either or situation, you'll want to make sure that as you have set up that module, that checking either of those or filling in either of those fulfills the requirement. Otherwise, it will keep kicking back to the bidder and want them to fill in or checkbox every one of those choices. We had that happen a couple of times early on, that resulted in unresponsive, and we went through everything manually then. It did not change the outcome, thankfully. But yeah, so we've had a couple of those glitches early on. So that's something I would caution people as you're setting up. There is a function in BidExpress that once you have set up a solicitation before it goes live, you can do a dry run, you can test it. And we have our engineering manager do that to make sure that we're not overlooking some oddball question or oddball requirement that is going to cause a good bid to go unresponsive because of you know, just kind of an input error.
Thanks, Rob. Lauren, I have a question that's come in for you. Does Bricker and Eckler use an e-procurement platform?
No, so we have an internal FTP site that we use for the bid submittal process, and we kind of monitor that on our end, and that site also allows us to export out the timestamp report, and we just kind of use that internally behind our firewall, and then we just use Zoom to actually do the bid opening. So no procurement platform, just kind of internal tools that we have at the firm.
Thank you. I'll put this out to the group for anyone who can best answer this, but a question came in. Does anyone know if the state of Ohio or OFC has a standard e-procurement process or platform that they use?
I can hop on this question just because I came across it in my research of the various platforms. ODOT does use a branch of BidExpress. I think it's called, I don't know, Rob, can you help me? It's still Infotech, which is the parent company of BidExpress, but for the state, they have their own version. But 44.
I think it's through their Doc Express service.
Yeah, maybe that's it. But 44 of the departments of transportation across the nation are using that same platform. I can't speak to the schools. OFC is schools, right? I don't know what they use.
Next question that came through, and I'll leave it to who best can answer this one, but can you explain the agency pay up to 25 solicitations?
Yeah, so in that payment model, the owner, so like me, Grove City, I would pay BidExpress that amount, and that would allow me to post 25 bids for the year, and then vendors would not be required to pay to submit bids. It would be all free to the vendors submitting. And that model is what Bid Express offers. We chose to go with the vendor model, but in some of the other ones that were agency pay models, there were like license fees where, you know, on Bonfire, for example, you can see on my spreadsheet that's up there, it says 7 needed. That's just what Grove City would need. I would need 7 different people to be able to get in there and modify things, and each individual user has to have their own license. So that payment model got a little bit pricey for me at $5,000 a license per year. So,
Cindi, I'll keep picking on you here. Are the contracts completed through Bid Express as well?
no, we do not do our actual contracts through Bid Express.
Dan, Rob, do you?
Most of what's submitted through Bid Express populates the contract. The only portion then that we request, and we've been doing this through Adobe Signature, is the actual signatures from our law director, finance director, city manager, and then from an officer or principal of the company. And so the actual 11-page contract document is the only one that is not populated, filled out, and ready to go when we get the bid. So that's really streamlined things. So no longer are we using couriers and making sure that we have 10 to 12 copies of the actual contract so that it's all ready for all of their subs and all of their field representatives and all those different types of things.
That's my next push. We're unfortunately still doing those final contract signatures, pen to paper. But I've been working with my legal department on what they're comfortable with as far as electronic signatures, and looking at different available technologies out there, whether it's Adobe or DocuSign, or there's a few others that we've been looking at. But yeah, that's my next push, to move that 100% electronic as well.
Dan and Rob, how have you handled requests for copies of plans and bid documents from other online platforms such as Mcgraw-Hill?
You talking about also this, like some of the plan rooms and things like that nationwide?
Yeah, Bid Express.
Yeah, what we've done, that quite honestly was a little bit of a pain in the backside prior, because we would get calls from them. They wouldn't want to pay. They wouldn't even want to pay to have the full plan set shipped to them. And so that was always a hassle and a little bit of a wrangle, getting those shipped out, getting them to them on time. So now we post the entire bid set, plan set on our website, and it's watermarked. I set that up through Word as well as Adobe, and then lock it down so that somebody can't manipulate it to try and, you know, come up with something else. But, you know, it's really kind of a non-starter situation with that, because you've got to then go to Bid Express. And it's also helped too, because now most of the plan rooms that I've dealt with have gone ahead and gotten a subscription. So the calls about bid tabulations, the calls about unit pricing tabulation from the different contractors, all those types of things that used to take a lot of hours after a bid was opened have pretty much gone out the window.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, Josh, I experienced that exactly as Rob said. But so when he says subscription, for anyone to log on to Bid Express and set up a profile is free. You only ever have to pay if you submit a bid. So the plan rooms, in my experience so far, have all just logged on, and they, you know, get our plans that way and do with them whatever plan rooms do. And it has really eliminated a lot of those calls. And then same with, as soon as you post that bid tabulation, and on the bid opening, after we've awarded, I'll go back in and comment that who was awarded and which, whether it was just base or additional bids or whatever. what's been awarded, then instead of the calls in of, you know, a month later, has this been awarded yet, to who, what was their price, they're able to just go find it for themselves. And after the first few times of them calling for the information and us sending them to the website, the calls have really kind of ceased, and they just go help themselves to the information since it's there.
We had a question in here. So Grove City does not pay anything for Bid Express?
Yeah, that's right. We chose the vendor pay model, so we pay nothing.
And got one out here for the group. Was there any change in the DBE participation when they went paperless?
We didn't see much change. What we saw by and large was some of the smaller and more specialized projects that we always crossed our fingers and hoped to get at least 2 bids. And sometimes we get no bids and have to throw it back out. Now with it being through Bid Express and a lot of contractors paying for that subscription, they get notified anytime we throw up any type of solicitation, and they can look at it and see if it's something they want to bid on. So, you know, we experience a larger pool of qualified bidders than what we ever did with paper submission.
Like I said, I apologize if I missed this earlier, but do you still advertise paper, or do you rely on Bid Express to go through and handle all of your advertisements now?
We do Bid Express, and we also marry that up with our website. So on Bid Express, there's a link to go to the city website, and we have a dedicated bid postings page. And then also from there, you can look at the watermarked plans and specs, the full, what would be your bid book. And then it's linked over to the Bid Express solicitation so that you can go in there, get started, and submit a bid that way if you wish to.
Perfect. I was just getting ready to ask you that, Cindi.
I thought that was a good segue. Yeah. So every owner who utilizes Bid Express will have their own homepage. We have that link on our website at all times, even when we don't have a solicitation posted. So right now we currently don't have any solicitations, but this is our homepage, just, you know, our identifiable information. If you want to put any standard documents that are used for every project, you can do that here. We have our general conditions posted on our website, so I should probably actually get it posted here as well. We have no upcoming solicitations, but you're able to see on this site any of the closed solicitations, and you could go back in and look at who the plan holders were. You could look and see, you know, what the bid tabulations that's posted, and then all of the actual bid documents and plans are all stored in there. And as the owner, I can archive these at any point when I want to, so that they don't show up on this closed page. Obviously, since we're less than a year in, you know, you can see how many projects we've done that are still active on there. I'll likely leave those up for a year and then, you know, annually go and archive them.
We are kind of getting up to the end of our attendee questions here. So Cindi, I'm going to open this one up to you and kind of run it on down the line. Is there anything that you would do differently kind of now looking back, and are there any changes that you plan to make going forward with your online process?
I would say that we're very satisfied with the platform that we chose. You know, not to knock any of the other ones, they were good. This one just fits us best. And so as far as that, I wouldn't change anything. Like Rob said, you really need to take the time up front to set up your templates, and the support staff from Bid Express is really good at helping you do that. A couple of the glitches that we found, you know, oftentimes we'll have a base bid, but then sometimes several additional bids. And if you don't set that up when you fetch the bids online and are doing that bid opening process, the total that it gives you includes the additional bids, whereas you want to be able to separate out your base bids and your additional bids. So our changes are really more internally on how we set them up initially and making sure our templates are accurate and work the way that we want to on bid opening day. I don't know that we'll ever go back to in-person bid openings. It's really just way more convenient and efficient for everyone. The contractors probably don't really want to drive to our office to do that. That just takes time out of their day, and they're busy as well. And then same for us. posting online as long as it's allowed. We'll continue to do the openings that way, I think.
Dan and Rob, same questions. Anything you would do differently looking back, and any changes that you plan on making going forward?
I would say trying to get it implemented earlier. There was a push very early on, but some resistance to the technology. Then once we got transitioned over, there was resistance to no longer taking paper bids and doing the in-person. You know, for better or for worse, COVID ended a whole lot of the impossibilities and practicalities, and that can never happens that we came up against. So, you know, I'm thankful from that standpoint, if nothing else, that we've gotten there. Something I would do absolutely differently. When we first started, we stipulated that any of the bid bonding had to come through SurePath or Surety 2000, which are the two electronic bonding companies that are offered through Bid Express. We started getting some heartburn from that for certain contractors that did not have a subscription to Bid Express and didn't do a whole lot of submission through Bid Express, because they would call their bonding company and it would be a $300 to $350 processing fee for their bonding company to get registered with those two digital bonding verification processes. So we ended up including, as Grove City has done, the opportunity to upload a paper bid bond and then have it verified. So, or, you know, the letter credit or cashier's check, the old standard ways. So that's one thing I definitely do different at the beginning. And other than that, I can't think of anything in particular. Just be fastidious about it. Also, have somebody that knows the system available 2 hours prior to bid opening. I have found that even though we publish the plan holders list, and we'll go in and see how many bids there are, and there'll be nothing. We'll get nervous. And we have found that a lot of the contractors try and wait and submit their bids at the very last minute. Otherwise, it shows publicly that they've submitted those bids. They don't want their competitors knowing that they've submitted bids, because it may affect pricing and those sorts of things. If they know, oh, so-and-so is way more aggressive than we are, and those types of things. So now we're gonna cut our bid by 20% or whatever. So they start flooding in. We do our bid openings at noon. They start flooding in between 11:30 and noon, and the phone calls start at about 10:30 to 11. You know, virtual tech support. If somebody's not 100% familiar with the process, or if there's a new module or unit pricing extension they're not used to seeing.
Thank you, Rob. Lauren, same question. I know you work with a lot of communities kind of transitioning to electronic. Have you noticed anything that as they've moved forward, it's good to keep in mind, or any changes that you've seen once they adopt the online platform that they've made to kind of help facilitate work in the future?
Yeah, so my big one kind of echoes what Robert was just talking about. You know, you sometimes have contractors who aren't very comfortable with technology, so they'll submit a bid multiple times. We've had issues with that, where it's just the same contractor keeps submitting a bid because they think it hasn't uploaded. Once we started getting those issues in the beginning, we started giving bidders a designated contact, which is typically me. So I get the panicked emails and or phone calls asking, you know, has this loaded? I want to make sure it's in there correctly. So we have a designated contact for kind of those tech stress issues. And then we've also just gotten really diligent with following up with people. So as soon as someone submits a bid, I'll type up an email, whether I send it out or it's our client. We like to do it within at least 5 minutes of getting that notification that something has been submitted, just to give the submitter that peace of mind that we have received your submittal. And that's kind of just been the big issue with us, is just people being worried and not really familiar with the technology and nervous about the technology. So I would just say having a person that's the point of contact for people to just call and verify that you have received their bid, and or just making sure you're really diligent on following up and letting people know that you have in fact received the bid on your end.
Great, thank you. And we had one last question that came through here, I think, before we wrap things up. It's this is for Dan, Rob, and Cindi. Have you seen any issues, or sorry, 2 questions that came through. Anyone using a separate platform for commodity bids or small service bids like mowing?
We are not.
No, we're not either.
And I've seen, are there any issues with having a multiple bid openings at the same time?
I don't think so. We've done it. We've had more than one that opened on the same day and time. We just work our way through them just like you would have if they were in person. One thing just to touch on real quick, Josh, I think I don't know that we touched on it in here before, is that our bidding platform also makes Q&A and addenda really easy to issue. So there's a Q&A function you can turn on in the software, so vendors can go ahead and just ask their questions. When we respond, depending on the response, it'll prompt us to create an addendum if necessary, and then it timestamps and make sure that those addendum automatically go out to all of the plan holders. And so it makes that process, more efficient and easier as well.
Yeah, I'd piggyback on that and agree with that, and also add that we recently did 4 bid openings at one time, and it was no issue. It was just bam, bam, bam. The one thing I would caution that we found out the hard way after we transitioned to a lot of us working remotely, Bid Express for the actual bid openings currently only works through Internet Explorer, not through Microsoft Edge, Google, or Safari. I don't know if that's something with our plan or what it's been, but I found that I was not able to open bids via my MacBook. So I had to get a hold of tech support, and there will be a digital ID that is downloaded and encrypted into the computer that you use to assemble your bids. And that has to be present on whatever computer you use to open your bids as well. So make sure if you're working across, an office desktop, a home desktop, a laptop, whatever it be, that you have verified that you have that digital ID on all of those computers, so that you don't have the technical glitch of not being able to fetch the bids that you have opened come opening day.
Yeah, that's interesting, Rob. I haven't experienced that. Oftentimes our design engineer helps us load everything. I've made them into a manager on our account in Bid Express, and so they'll upload a lot of things. And then we have taken turns whether I fetch the bids or they fetch the bids, and I use Google Chrome, so I haven't had that issue, but that's good feedback.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I've not been able to do it via anything but Internet Explorer.
And you were right, Cindi, I forgot to touch on these earlier, but no issues really with addenda and getting a confirmation of receipt, and also with issues like with on-time documentation and submittals and that kind of thing.
Yeah, it really kind of takes it out of your hands, because Bid Express has a record log where it timestamps when the email went out, when the email was opened. And so you can, if somebody says, well, I never got the addendum, you have the backlog to prove otherwise. So it's really made that process easier, I think.
Lauren, I'll fire this question over to you. Same thing with addenda and receiving documentation on time. We had a question that came through. Since Bricker and Eckler does not use Bid Express, you are responsible for ensuring that the bids are submitted completely?
So we're not technically responsible to make sure that the bid that is submitted is absolutely complete. We've never really had an issue where we've received an incomplete bid. So, I mean, to answer the question, no, we're not responsible to check on that before the bid opening. And to be quite honest, we haven't really run into that situation with any of our clients. So, yeah, I don't really have a lot of details on that, but the main answer is no, we're not responsible.
I've talked with some other places that have used Bricker and Eckler for their online. It sounds like you're there, you're like a third party, you're kind of authenticate and make sure everything is kind of there with security standpoints. You're providing that FTP site. You're providing all the information and stuff to the communities holding the bid opening. So at that point, it's up to them to make sure that all the bids are, you know, good and viable, but you're there as kind of to help add a layer of security and to facilitate the process, it sounds like.
Yeah, yep, exactly. So more of a security standpoint and a technology facilitation.
We had an FYI come in that Bid Express was enhanced a few months ago to allow for multiple browser support. So FYI, Rob. And I think at that, we are all out of questions and at our 12 o'clock time limit. So I'd like to thank all of our presenters today. A lot of these questions we had going in, but we had just as many that we were handling on the fly. So I thought everybody did a really great job. So thank you for that. And all the attendees, thank you for joining. You'll be getting your PDH coming up soon from Victoria. We'll send those out, but I would like to conclude our online bid opening webinar for today. Thank you.
Thanks for hosting, Josh.
Thanks very much.